Welcome to our remote worshipers. Thank you for being with us. Great Falls, thank you for your patience as we are slightly behind schedule. But we are going to open the Word of God at this time and take a look at what God has to say. Today we continue in our sermon series entitled The Inner Journey. It is a sermon series that causes us to reflect. It's coming from the prophets of the Old Testament. And it causes us to reflect as to what's going on in our lives. In this series, we look at how God spoke to his people and to his prophets. Our last sermon in the series, which was not streamed to Shoto, so I'll give you a quick rundown. We were in the first chapter of Jeremiah. And we made the point that God is aware of us. God is aware of us. And we made the case that God has a calling on our lives. We pointed out that to experience God's intentions for us, we need to make no excuses. Make no excuses. Obey despite, number one, make no excuses. And obey despite our fears. I guess I duplicated one of the points. And we recognize that God saves us through his calling. If you want to see the whole sermon, go online at the Great Falls site, and it is there. We determined that it was time to act now and follow God's calling. So today we're going to extract another lesson from the prophet Jeremiah. This time we are in chapter 7. So if you have your Bibles handy, click, point, tap, open, flip. But you may want to find your way to Jeremiah chapter 7. I begin at verse 1. The text says, "The word that came to Jeremiah," it's my PowerPoint keeping up with me? "The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, stand in the gate of Yahweh's house and proclaim there this word and say, hear the word of Yahweh, all you of Judah who enter in at these gates to worship Yahweh." Before we go much further, let's make sure we're tracking. Who is God telling Jeremiah to address? Who is God telling Jeremiah to address?
All the church members.
Good answer. Good answer. All who enter to worship Yahweh. Yes, everyone going to church, the church folk. And when you consider life in Judah at that time, it's highly likely that most people were not going to temple at that time. The nation was in disarray, apostasy had taken place. So God's probably not even talking to the majority of Judah. He's talking to the religious part of Judah, to those who are attending church. Pretty much those who are like we are. While there was always a religious portion of society, the larger the community became, the less percent of that community was actually practicing religion. If you go to Israel today, you will be surprised. If you expect Israel to be a religious nation, you would be surprised how secular Israel really is. Outside of Old City, all the bars are open on Friday night. Everything operates on Sabbath. It's not a religious environment by and large. And yet, there are many people who go to the Wailing Wall on Friday night to worship and to have their welcoming of the Sabbath. But I propose to you, God was talking to the few religious people left. People like us. So we're clear as to who God was speaking to. Let me back up. Since we're clear on who God was speaking to, what did God want to say to them? Let's continue reading. We're at verse 3. "Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your doings, and I will cause you to dwell in this place." All right, so who's God talking to? I'm sorry? His people, the religious folk, the church-going folk, his people. What's he saying to them? He's saying change, amend your ways, change your ways, change what you are doing. I'm about to throw your nation out of your land, but you change your ways, and I'll let you stay. So God is telling the religious people, the church-going people, the Sabbath-keeping people, the worshipers in Judah, that they need to make a change. But wait, there's more. Let's take a look at verse 4. He says, do not trust these lying words, saying the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh are these. What lying words? If you look at it in the ESV version, it says, do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh. Why would God say to that the people were lying? Because they pointed out that the house of Yahweh was in their midst. What is a lie about that? Was God not speaking the truth? How did a physical reality suddenly become a lie? My friends, the big lie was that the temple was the same as God. The big lie was that the temple was the same thing as God. See, my friends, God had a temple, but God was not the temple, nor was the temple God. The identity of the religious community in Judah was built on the presence of God among them. After all, it was God who had said in Exodus 25:8, and let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So the whole idea of the temple was that God was with them. It was in the temple that Yahweh manifested himself. It was toward the temple that his people were supposed to pray. It was at the altar that they were supposed to find mercy. Only to the temple were they to bring their sacrifices and burnt offerings. While they could never enter the building itself, just coming to the courtyard of the temple put them in proximity to God. My friends, I believe if God was speaking in our days, he'd say, don't trust these words. We have the truth. We have the truth. We have the truth. Don't trust these words. We have the Sabbath, the Sabbath, the Sabbath. Don't trust these words. We have the prophecies, the prophecies, the prophecies. God was saying, don't put your trust in the temple. Don't put your trust in the church. Don't put your trust in the Sabbath. Don't put your trust in my worship. Put your trust in me. The physical builder, Solomon, the physical builder of the temple, recognized that reality. At his dedication prayer, Solomon asked the question, but will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, the heaven of heavens cannot contain him. How much less this temple which I have built, 1 Kings 8:27. Solomon got what Judah seemed to have forgotten. And that lesson is this: God is bigger than the church. God is bigger than the church. In other words, our view of God is too small. When we place our trust in a building that houses the glory of God, our view of God is too small. When we base our righteousness on our religious identity, our view of God is too small. When our national or cultural identity establishes our moral compass, our view of God is too small. When we feel justified by our Sabbath observance, our view of God is too small. When our prophetic interpretations spawn hubris, our view of God is too small. When our sense of safety comes from doctrinal statements, our view of God is too small. It's been said that God made man on the sixth day, but man has been making God ever since. Think about that. In our making of God, we shrink God into our imagination. In our making of God, we squeeze him into our worldview. In our making of God, we scale him down to our context and we paint him in our likeness. We forget that he exceeds our thoughts. We ignore that he surpasses our constructs. We are blind to his magnitude and we miss his grandeur. While the temple was once magnificent, it paled in comparison to God. While the Sabbath is holy, it is vapid apart from God. While truth matters, it is a lie when it is devoid of God. When we put our trust in the things of God rather than in God himself, my friends, we commit idolatry as well. I recall some years ago, and as I was preparing for the sermon, I realized it's been more than 30 years since this occasion. Yeah, I'm not supposed to be able to tell stories that old. Anyhow, I recall years ago when I was auditing in Florida that I met with one of the church treasurers, went over the book, and we got to talking, and she told me the story of a friend of hers who was upset because her favorite saint, obviously not an Adventist, her favorite saint was St. Lazarus. And she had been praying to St. Lazarus for a long time for a particular request, and she did not get the answer to that request. And she kept praying, and she did everything she could, but she did not get the answer. Finally, she got so upset, she turned her statue of St. Lazarus upside down and said, "Take that." And I say to myself, how often do we do similar, though not with a physical statue? Many Christians do similarly with church. Though not usually spoken, when we don't get what we want from God, we quit the church. When God doesn't heal, we quit the church. When our business goes belly up, we no longer need a religion. When relationships fail, so does our faith. So let's make sure in our lives, God is bigger than his church. Let's make sure that God is bigger than his systems are. Let's be certain that God takes precedence over his organizations. My friends, I say this to you because we need a bigger God as we approach Christ's second coming. A little God that can be contained in a church building is not going to carry us through the days ahead. A little God that is formulaic is not going to be enough to see us through what is about to happen. Why, everything else in our world is scaling up. I don't know if you've noticed that. Our anxieties are scaling up. Our challenges are scaling up. Our distractions are scaling up. Our frustrations are scaling up. Our disappointments are scaling up. Our hurts are scaling up. Our loneliness is scaling up. And as this world approaches its end, we need a deeper connection with a bigger God than the one who we can control and manipulate. But what does the Bible say will happen toward the end? Take a look at Matthew 24. Matthew 24, that's where Jesus gives signs of his coming. He says, and we're getting down to the end, he says, beginning at verse 11, that many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will what? Will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved, and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. The gospel of the kingdom being preached to all the world is the only unfulfilled prophecy relating to the return of Jesus, by the way. But back up to verse 12. What comes before the whole world hears the gospel. Verse 12 says, and because lawlessness will abound, what will happen? The love of many will grow cold. That's an often overlooked statement. We sort of figure, well, people won't get along. Let's tie that back with what Jeremiah is telling us, or what God is telling Jeremiah. I believe God needs to be central in our lives if we're going to avoid Christian idolatry. Now, that should be an oxymoron, but it is not. Christian idolatry is the adherence to a prescribed Christian way of life that ignores the essence of God's teaching. Some may call it Christian nationalism. I believe the Bible will define it as idolatry. So here's the question: how do we do that? How do we avoid idolatry? How can God be big in our lives? That's our challenge question for today. How can God be big in our lives? Well, let's get back to Jeremiah. We're in chapter 7. Take a look at the following verse 5. The text says, "For if you thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if you thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, or walk after gods to your hurt, then I will cause you to dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever." Now, on September 13, when I was last here, our sermon came from the book of Isaiah chapter 1, where God told his people, don't bring any more futile sacrifices to me. Your incense is an abomination to me. Your new moons, your Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot endure the iniquity of your sacred meetings, if you recall that sermon. God says, your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They are trouble to me. In that sermon, we said we should shun evil, care for the oppressed, and see God in people. But let me ask you this question. Is Jeremiah here starting to sound a lot like Isaiah? Take a look. Verse 6, "If you do not oppress the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, or walk after other gods to your hurt, then I'll let you live in the land." Is Jeremiah sounding like Isaiah? Mind you, they are not of the same generation. Isaiah should have been dead or dying by the time Jeremiah is being born. Let me ask you this question. What does it mean when God repeats himself? It's important. Remember the case of Pharaoh? Pharaoh got how many dreams? One or what? 2 dreams, right? And Joseph said to him, God had told you this twice because it is certain, right? In the case of Pharaoh, in the case of Pharaoh's dreams, God gave the message twice, and Pharaoh got it. But in the case of church folk in Judah, he sent multiple prophets, but they didn't get it. Here's the question: are we getting it? When we or those we hire or select practice oppression, God turns away from us. When we affirm that which exploits others, God is displeased. When we ally with that which offends, God is displeased. As we read the prophetic books of the Bible, it will become both obvious and redundant that God favors the oppressed, that God favors the exploited, that God favors the marginalized. So to avoid idolatry, I almost said adultery, let's avoid adultery, but to avoid idolatry, let's disassociate with oppression. Let's cut ties with those who oppress. Let's stand on the side of the oppressed. Let's amend our ways, as God says, for God cares more about our treatment of others than he does about his own house, as we see in the Old Testament. But let's keep reading. Let's not stop there. Let's keep reading. Verse 8. Behold, you trust in lying words that cannot profit. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, and walk after other gods whom you did not know, and then come and stand before me in this house which is called by my name and say, we are delivered to do all these abominations? Verses 8 through 10 indicate a disconnect between what was happening in church and what was happening away from church. If we serve a small God, my friends, we can compartmentalize him, her, or it. When we relegate a small God, when we serve a small God, we can relegate that small God to one day a week. When we serve a small God, we can reduce a little God to a periodic worship experience. But the Creator God sees and is in everything we do. As little God Christians, we can be well behaved in church, but away from church, our attitude rots, our emotions are out of control, and our vocabulary is foul. As little God Christians, our needs come first. As little God Christians, everyone else is a tool to be used in attaining what we want. But as Bible God Christians, however, even our thoughts are subject to what God says. As Creator God Christians, his will comes first in all we do. As big God Christians, we're here to serve others and not ourselves. So the second thing we want to be mindful of is to do right away from church. Let's not focus all our good deeds on one day or one event. And there's a thing I've seen in Adventism, and I've been in Adventism for almost 6 decades now, and I've seen that somehow we like to pack all of our good works into one day. I've been in churches where it's all day church. And lest you sin, let's go out and do something for the community, or let's engage in missionary work on Sabbath afternoon. But the rest of the week, we can be as selfish as we want to be. My friends, let's do right away from church. It's hard to talk about this without going back to Micah 6:8. I think every Christian knows Micah 6:8. We all know it, right? He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does Yahweh require of you, but that you do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Oh, my friends, let's do justly 24/7. Let's love mercy 24/7. Let's be humble, walk humbly with our God 24/7. Let's be 24/7 big God Christians. But let's finish reading the passage also. Let's pick up at verse 12. In verse 12, Jeremiah 7, he says, "But go now to my place which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. And now, because you have done all these things, says Yahweh, and I spoke to you rising up early and speaking, but you did not hear, and I called you, but you did not answer. Therefore, I will do to the house which is called by my name, in which you trust, and to this house which I gave to you and your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. I will cast you out of my sight, as I cast out all your brethren, the whole posterity of Ephraim." In case you don't understand the background narrative, Shiloh was in the northern kingdom. When the kingdom split, Shiloh was part of the northern kingdom. Northern kingdom had been taken by the Assyrians about 70 years before Jeremiah came on the scene. So and Shiloh happened to be where the wilderness tent was set up before David, or more accurately, Solomon, built the temple. So Shiloh always had a sacred place in the mind of God's people. And God says, if you don't change your ways, go visit Shiloh. See if there's any remnants of what used to be in Shiloh. No, it's overrun by the Assyrians. The presence of the wilderness tent did nothing to protect Shiloh from being taken. As God allowed with Shiloh, he later would allow with Jerusalem. And even after a rebuilding, again in AD 70, that temple was destroyed. And it still has not been rebuilt. My friends, be mindful of this. Don't mistake patience for permission. Don't mistake patience for permission. The Apostle Peter tells us, for the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. If God has not executed judgment on us, it's because he's being patient, not because he's given us permission. So what's the third thing we need to do? We need to take God seriously. You know, the purpose of a smoke alarm in a public building or even in your house is to get you out of the building before the fire or the smoke kills you, right? Well, God was sending prophets as smoke alarms, sounding the alarms. But how many of us have had a false alarm in our homes with those smoke detectors? Is there one more? Yeah. And what happens is, with enough false alarms, we stop paying attention sometimes. If we think we misinterpret God's words as false alarms, then we stop taking them seriously. God's prophetic words are smoke alarms going off. I recommend we take them seriously. But you say, with all of that said, Joel, with all of that said, what's the good news? What am I supposed to walk away with today? Well, walk away with this, my friend. Here's the good news. God looks out for those who take him seriously. Let's go back to verse 6 and 7. The text says, if you do not oppress a stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place or walk after other gods you hurt, then I will cause you to dwell in this land, in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. In other words, take me seriously, I'll take you seriously. Take me seriously, I will protect you. Take me seriously, I will make sure that you are taken care of. Jeremiah's life was an example of that. While Jeremiah was prophesying, he experienced some serious opposition. The priests, the people of his father, remember Jeremiah was the son of the priest, son of Hilkiah the priest at that. While Jeremiah was prophesying, he experienced abuse, he experienced torture, he experienced persecution. He was arrested, he was beaten, he was put into a dungeon, he was left to starve. And all of these things, you may wonder, well, God wasn't taking care of Jeremiah too well, was he now? Once upon a time, I wanted to be a prophet till I read the whole story of Jeremiah. I'm like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to go through all of that, you know? But it was in all of that God saved Jeremiah. Because when the Babylonians came, Jeremiah was not taken. Jeremiah was not killed. Jeremiah may have even been in one of those pits, in one of those prisons where the Judah's king, I don't want to say Jewish king because that has different connotation, but where the king of Judah put Jeremiah. And it was there that God chose to save him. You know, sometimes God saves us in the lion's den. Sometimes God saves us in the pit. Sometimes God saves us in the dry well. And our problem is we're so scared of going to those places, we don't let God do what God wants to do. But Jeremiah did. And God saved him. And when the Babylonians came and took the land, and not only was Jeremiah not killed, he was protected. And he was told, Jeremiah, the land is yours. Pick what you want to do. Live anywhere you want to live. We will leave you here, and you do as you wish. Unfortunately, it took God's people to forcibly take Jeremiah into exile in Egypt, but that's another story. Notice, my friends, that our kindness to others and our faithfulness to God merges into the promise of protection. If you would treat others well and not worship other gods, then I will let you dwell in the land. My friends, kindness and faithfulness is what God is looking for today. So at the risk of sounding underwhelming with a cliche, I appeal to you this: love God and love people. Yes, I know it's cliche, I know it's been overworked, but that is exactly what God is telling us to do in his word. Don't put your trust in religion, love God and love people. Don't put your trust in buildings, love God and love people. Don't put your trust in systems, but rather love God and love people.